Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendes. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me Anca Bodzer. Anca was born and raised in Romania, but she moved to Madrid, Spain in 2008 to pursue a master's in intercultural communication, translation, and interpreting. After that, Anca was awarded a PhD scholarship, and so 15 years later, she's still living in Spain. Anca is the holder of a PhD in translation and interpreting, and she currently works as a program manager specialized in the life sciences vertical, most precisely in linguistic validation of clinical outcome assessments. So very technical and very specialized. Anca has strategically pivoted from academia into the localization industry, and she has also started her own podcast, Language Surfers, as a platform to bridge the gap between professionals from the localization industry and academia. Anca, it's a pleasure to be here today, and especially, knowing that I was recording with you for Language Surfers yesterday. It's super cool that we were able to do this back to back. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
Thank you so much, David, for having me, and also thank you so much for accepting to be on my podcast. It's really a very interesting experience to get the chance to hear both stories in 2 consecutive days. So I'm really honored to be here on your show and to be able to share my insights with your audience. I hope they really find some interesting insights and takeaways from my story.
I'm sure they will. The community is always very eager to hear stories of how people went into different domains. Program management, like we were mentioning before the start of the interview, is something that you hear a lot about, and that a lot of people say, "Oh, it's it's really easy and natural to go from PhD to program management or to project management, I should say." But I think there's more to it than just that. There's specifics. There's transferable skills that need to be talked about, and the reality of them, the importance of them, the breadth of them, and this is why I'm super glad to be with you here today, because you went through all of that, and so there's no one better than you or someone with your profile to actually describe how the journey is to go from your PhD into project management and then eventually into program management. And as a kind of a compliment to what you were saying, it was also very cool to be on Language Surfers. And I think what's going to be interesting for people listening to this episode, independently of which one they listen to first, is to then go listen to the mirror episode where I'm being interviewed by Anca, and to hear kind of my journey, based on Anca's questions, which are the podcast is different than Beyond the Thesis. So it was really, really cool for me to kind of revisit my journey based on the way you thought Language Surfer. So yeah, I think it's going to be a cool episode duo that people can listen to. So Anca, because I always like listeners to kind of learn a little bit more and identify a little bit more with my guests, I always ask them to add, what would be 1 or 2 things that you would add to what I shared, to let listeners know a little bit more about who Anca Bodzer is, what motivates her, what got you to decide to go into languages, into translation, and also what motivated you to go all the way to graduate school, because not everyone needs to go all the way there to work in the industry. So what are a handful, 2 or 3 points that you would add to that really quick summary that I gave?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction and the question to start this. So what I would add is the fact that, as you well mentioned, I was born and raised in Romania, from a city in the northern part of Romania, very close to the border with Hungary and Ukraine, but especially I would mention Hungary. And the way that I ended into the translation industry is maybe shaped by this experience where I was born, in the sense that living very close to the border, some family members speak Hungarian, and specifically, for example, my parents, they do speak Hungarian, but my sister and I, we didn't speak Hungarian. And it was, for example, during Christmas when my parents were talking where to hide the gifts, that they would speak in Hungarian in the house, and we were not understanding what's going on. So it's true that this was something that really challenged me. Hey, I want to understand what's being said around me. And I've developed this, curiosity of, understanding what's being said around me. And I think that's what shaped my, professional career and selecting what I would study later. And yeah, definitely. While I was doing my bachelor's degree in English and Spanish philology, I got a chance to start working, and I traveled with that company where I was working as a translator and interpreter. I started to travel to Spain, and I really liked Madrid. I really liked Spain, the lifestyle. They are, at that moment, I perceived they are more relaxed. The sun, the weather, great food, and I said, "Oh wow, I would like to live in this country. I would like to live in Madrid." So it was a love at first sight regarding Madrid. And I never, maybe it's the innocence of age, but I never thought it would be something impossible. And that's why while I was studying, I was in my first year of bachelor's degree when I said, I'm going to do a master's degree there. So yeah, I moved to do the master's degree. I applied and I got accepted. I enrolled, and basically I moved to a different country where I had no family member. Nobody from my family was in Spain or outside the country. My close family, meaning. And yeah, it was a nice journey. I mean, it's a challenge to move outside without any support in the country, to say so. And I think what was also specifically important for me at that moment is that Romania was just being accepted as a member state in the European Union. So I had to face these challenges of, legal administrative tasks and documentation to make sure that I would come legally in the country and, meet all the criteria. So that was something that was a challenge at that moment, to say so, compared to what we have nowadays, right? And after the master's degree, I got a PhD scholarship. And basically, after my master's degree, it was that turning moment when I had to decide, do I go back to Romania or do I want to stay? And obviously, I wanted to stay. So I had two options, either go and find a job in the market, in the industry, or I was good at, studying, and I was getting great marks. I also like my master thesis because basically my PhD is a continuation of my master's thesis. So again, I prepared the documentation, I wrote the project, and I found out that I was, awarded this PhD. So that meant a financial stability for me for 4 years, 4 additional years in Spain. So obviously I took the chance. I took the opportunity, and yeah, that's how I started my PhD.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so like a lot of us, once you decide to go into graduate school, for a lot of us, it implies going, at least, moving town, maybe moving country or continent, which was my case when I came for the PhD. And it can be challenging to be somewhere where you don't have this kind of safety network of family and even friends. But one thing that you did and that I did too, in my case, was you visited, or you knew where you wanted to go before starting the process, and that's already a big step to know, okay, this is a place where I know I can live and have how can I say, be comfortable. I like the culture. I like you said, the food, the lifestyle, etc. All of those things are important when you're moving for graduate school. If you move only because, it's this lab or it's this PI, then you can go and find out that there's things in your day to day that end up being obstacles. And I think a good lesson there is visit and try to make sure that there are enough positive elements for you there to spend, let's say, 2 years for a master's, or 3 or more if you're here in North America for a PhD. So yeah,
definitely, that's a great advice. And in my case, I also did the bachelor's degree outside of my hometown, so it was not such a direct move, to say so, outside from my home. But still, it's a different country. Just mentally thinking that I was 2 hours away from my parents at 200 kilometers, but now I'm 3 hours away in more than 2,000 kilometers. So in the end, it's just a mental perception that
Yeah,
you're far away. But
exactly.
yeah, it wasn't the first experience outside of homes, and I think that also helps us, take the action and make the move in easier.
Of course, of course. Now, so you did your PhD. Now, of course, the title of this session today is From PhD to Program Management. I know there are different steps in there, but before we get into that, uh, I'd like to ask you something that has to do with the why of me doing Beyond the Thesis, and it is, did you are where you are today professionally, but during the PhD, were you already starting to build? Had you identified that you would go into project and program management? Were you able to prepare your career transition while you were in the PhD, or was it something that you had to kind of discover and build once you had your degree?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in my particular case, while I was doing my PhD, I wasn't thinking about going into industry. But then things unfold in such a way that I finished my PhD, and then I applied to be a lecturer. I got the opportunity to be a lecturer because I wanted to see the difference between, okay, there are certain things that I cannot do as a PhD scholar. But then I said that, okay, this is going to be different if you're a lecturer. So I applied, I got the position to say so. And I stayed there for almost 1 year as a lecturer. And that's when I decided that I want to move to the industry. And for me, it was a very informed decision. It's like when I'm leaving because I know that this is not suitable for me, right? So in that case, I didn't start to think about industry during my PhD. It was during that almost 1 year while I was a lecturer. That was my defining year. And that's when I started to, listen to how, pay attention to how I was feeling. We always talk about this identity crisis when you are a PhD, because it's also the pressure from the outside. How would the other ones see us when we spend so much time on a PhD? And the classic career path is to stay in the university, become a university professor and things like that. And in my family, I'm the first person who does the PhD. So I somehow, because it was my decision, but still I got some pressure, because every time I was going home, my family members or my friends were asking, oh, and now what? And now what? It's like, now I'm going to industry. So it's like, and why did you do the PhD? Right? If you want to go to the industry. Exactly. So you feel like, and this is not because I was judged or something like that. These are natural questions that we get from our environment. Just because, it's like when you finish high school, what do you want to study? When it's like you finish a specific time in your career, either academic or, professional, and people just want to know, where are you going from and where are you going to? And that's great, because that makes you think, hey, really, I need to stop and think what I want to do, right? And yeah, for me, in my particular case, it was that almost 1 year of being a lecturer that helped me identify that, hey, I tried this. It's not for me for particular reasons. I don't know whether you want to go into that detail or not. But it was during that year that I decided, okay, I'm going out, and this is a very informed decision I'm taking, meaning that I would not have regrets, because that's the great part that I think it's very important when we take a decision. Make sure that you've covered or you have covered all your doubts, so that when you take the decision to, make a plan or move into something, you don't regret it. Oh, but I don't know what it would look like. So I had that perspective. I was there in a different position rather than a PhD scholarship. And I said, okay, no, this is not for me. Not in the context I experienced that particular phase, to say so. And yeah, I moved into the industry, but also because, as I mentioned earlier, before having my PhD, during my bachelor's degree, I had 2 jobs, right? And I was working as a translator and interpreter. There were small companies, but I already had the perception of what being in the industry means. So for me, I was really lucky that I was, having these opportunities that I was working during my bachelor's degree in companies where people gave me an opportunity before even having a degree. They saw some potential in me that I maybe didn't see at that moment, because I felt like, no, I just want to focus on my studies. And they insisted, and I got these jobs, to say so. So I had this feeling of what it means to be in a private company. I had the perception of what it meant for me to stay in the academia. And then, okay, what do I choose? And I chose openly, in the sense that it was an informed decision. And I was lucky in that sense.
Yeah, a bunch of important things in what you said. The first expression you use that I really like is, I listened to myself, or something in that, in those waters. And that is something that's very important. And often, also, like you mentioned, there can be critic, there can be question, but sometimes there can be outside pressure, be it from family, friends, etc., to do a certain thing that is expected, and some fear, some anxiety of maybe opting for something that is not expected. I think it's a very human and normal thing, especially if you're the first to follow that path in your family. But in those moments, it's really important that you're able to listen to your inner voice. Can you maybe share one main reason or one main aspect of being a lecturer that was not working for you, and that was dissonant, and that first started that little feeling in your gut, and then that little voice saying, yeah, this is not for me? Because I'm sure someone who's listening is in a similar, or almost similar situation, and they will gain from hearing the specifics of how you went through it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very valid point. And that's something that, as you well say, our stories may help others find answers. And it's true that I think that the best gift I get from my PhD, apart from, the research itself and the people I met along the way, is the fact that for me, it was one of the toughest experience I had so far. And I think that it was quite tough also because of the age. So I did everything, bachelor's, master, and PhD. And it helped me, get to a level of maturity in a faster way than maybe other people, to say so, right? And I think that what really helped me in this journey with a PhD, and especially pivoting, is that, people might have expectations from you. There are some social boxes that you might want to tick, but then in the end, when you go home, and who lives your daily lives is yourself. So for me, it was that turning moment when I said, okay, what do I want to do now? What's important for me? Not for my parents, not for my friends, not for the people I have around this time and they can judge me, but what's really important for me. So I think it's basic thing that we align with ourselves, that we identify our core values, and we set our objectives in alignment with our values and with what fulfills us. And it's just a matter of, getting rid of all this noise, all the pressure from outside. Just sit with you, take a pen and a paper. That works very well, because our mind sometimes, with the thoughts, we go far away than we should.
Yeah.
Just as simple as that. Take a pen and a paper and identify your goals. Identify your goals, but based on your values. How you identify yourself, how you see yourself, where do you see yourself, what type of people you want to have around you, right? How you feel every day. That's very important. How do you feel when you go to work? When you wake up, is it that you feel, we all have good days and bad days, but as a general experience, how do you feel when you go to work? Are you getting excited, or is it, oh my God, there's another day I have to go? So it's very important. And this is something that only nobody can tell you.
Exactly. If every Sunday night you're feeling a pit in your stomach, that's a very strong sign. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And coming back to why the university was not suitable for me, to say so, even though I remember when I was in my secondary school, I know there was a teacher who was asking, what do you think you're going to be when you're going to be a professional? And I know that my reply was a teacher professor. And now looking there, I said, oh, well, I have the chance to be there. I am there, but now I don't want that anymore, right? Or not in that form, right? So for me, the aspects that helped me decide that I no longer want to be in the academia. But again, this was my personal experience. It doesn't have to do anything with general perceptions or the university itself. It's just my experience. I felt lonely there. I felt like, okay, I have the time to prepare my classes. I go to teach the classes. There are my students. I love the interaction with my students. I do have colleagues because you're part of a department, so you do interact with your colleagues. But I don't know why I had the feeling I felt lonely, because you go to your office during your hours. You don't always connect with your colleagues. We are in the same building, but then everyone has their own schedules, their own, write the project, do this, do that. And in the end, I felt like, very solitary. It felt solitary for me. But also because, as I mentioned, I had this previous experience in private companies. Those were small companies, and we were like, a really tight team. So I somehow, missed that feeling of I'm part of a more close group, of more, team spirit, to say so. That was one of the reasons. But the most important reason for me, it was that I paid attention to, as I mentioned, to my energy and to my time, because during the PhD, I was struggling with time, to say so. And when I became a lecturer, the university where I was a lecturer, they had two campuses, right? They were in two different locations. I had to take a train. It was about 10, 15 minutes away from each other. So the thing is that, for example, I was the last lecturer to join, right? At that moment. So basically, you take the classes that are left by others. It doesn't matter whether I'm good at or I'm passionate about legal translation or maybe economic or whatever they have on their schedule, right? So you just take what's left, which is good and bad at the same time. But I think what was really where I was really struggling is about commuting, because those have one class here in this campus, then take the train for 10, 15 minutes, go to the other campus, then come back. So those 15 minutes for me were very tiring, and it's such a short trip that you cannot really take advantage of this time. I cannot correct any exams. I cannot prepare anything, because by the time I open the laptop, I have to get out of the train. So I tried to get to an agreement to have my classes either in one campus or the other, or things like that. And it wasn't possible at that moment. So that's when I said, at the end of the day, what do I do? I'm just, getting into a train, getting down. I feel tired. I don't feel I give, the necessary energy or the necessary, the necessary energy to my classes, just because I'm getting tired of this, of commuting for such a short trajectory. So feeling a bit lonely there, I would say, and this,
this logistical or administrative issue.
Those were the turning moments when I decided that, okay, if there are no other options, there we cannot work it around, I'm not staying.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And another thing is, it looks to me like all the commuting also contributed to you being alone or lonely, because you were not 100% of the time in one department and taking part in whatever impromptu social things happen, because you're like commuting left and right. But I think a key element here, and you did mention it, is that you knew something different. You had this experience, and in the private sector, that had felt for you like a more tight knit team experience of people who collaborated and who were part of a small social group that interacted and was supportive, etc., etc. And then you didn't have that there, so it's totally understandable. And it goes to show how, if you can have an industry or a private sector experience during either your bachelor's or graduate school, it's precious learning, and it's precious knowledge that you accrue. And also, I don't know, we'll see whether it was like that for you, but eventually precious networking also, because here you are coming out with a degree that has no bridges to the private sector. But if you did an internship, for example, or like you actually had a small job in a team like this, well, now you know how it works. Because sometimes when you move from one space to the next, there's a big obstacle, which is you don't know what the next is. So sometimes you might even decide to stick around because of the unknown. And here, if you have this possibility of during university getting some experience in the private sector, it'll make that a kind of a safe space to transition to, because you already know it a little bit. And eventually, also, if you if you were in a team, if you establish relationships, it can even be a space where you can have a job waiting for you, or you can have someone who can mentor you or vouch for you for something else. So um, I wonder, did something like that pan out for you in terms of networking?
Yeah, and I think it's really nice that you highlighted this, the power of network and the people around you. And here, what I would say from my experience. So my last job, while I was in my final year of bachelor's degree, I was working in a legal office, to say so. It was the time again when Romania was becoming a European member of the European Union. So we had investors coming, being interested in Romania as a new market. And I remember that when I went to the interview for this company, they asked me, "So what are your plans for the future? Because we want someone to start with us but stay for a longer period. We don't want to mix." To change people often. And I said, yeah, next year when I finish, I want to go to Spain to do a master's degree. And I said, oh my God, I should better be looking into a different job. They're not going to to pick me. And I got the telephone saying, yeah, you're the one. And this was like, what? This is not coherent with what you were saying. And then after 1 year, they hired me. I worked there. And my manager at that moment, I said, yeah, now I finished my studies. I'm going to Spain. So don't be surprised. That's what I said in the interview. And then I was curious and I said, why did you hire me? Because what you were communicating to me as your needs to have someone who is, wanting to build a career here. And I said I would be available for 1 year. And he said, you know what? During the interviews, there are people that come to tell you what you want to hear. But what he saw in me in that moment was my determination, the fact that I had a clear vision of what I wanted, and I was honest. I didn't hide that thing. And he said, that's why we hired you. And yeah, and when I finished my job there, that was the very important thing. And when I had this conversation with my manager about this conversation I've just shared with you, he said to me, look, go to your master's degree. And if you want to remain in Spain, because I know you like it, you're passionate about the language, the culture, that's perfect. If by any reason you want to come back or things don't go like you plan, you have your working job with us. We're just going to hire someone for 1 year. And depending on how it goes, you have your space here. So that for me meant like, oh my gosh, just releasing that mental pressure that I'm going to a different country. I have no idea how it's going to work. I have all the enthusiasm in the world. But then this person is just giving me that, comfort to really go into, and knowing that if something goes bad, I can come back to the same job I really liked, and I have, the same life I wanted and continue with it.
Yeah,
So
super. It's a great safety net. That was amazing. So yeah, and so of course that's not what happened. You ended up staying for the masters and then for the PhD.
yeah, but I'm still in contact with that manager because, people that see your potential more than you do, it's like the people that shape your life and you want to have them around.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, often on the podcast, I talk about how networking is not an artificial thing of, talking to people and giving your contact card, whatever, and just collecting names. It's really about finding people with who you can establish true and enduring relationships with. Professional, they can be friendly, but the idea is that they are true. Your interest in them needs to be authentic, and this means that the relationship, if things click, it can last for a long time. And it seems that it's exactly what you have with this person. How often do you keep in touch with them?
Well, at the beginning, the first years, whenever I would go home, so when I go home to visit my family, I have to go to the same city where I studied. So if we were not able to meet in person for a coffee, we would at least, hey, how are you? I'm here. And now we're still in touch, but not that often. But I do try to keep in touch, several times a year, definitely.
It's a great take-home message of two, authenticity in interviews and in presenting yourself in job interviews or people who are looking to hire you. Yeah, being honest, and then reaping the results of that. If people respect you and appreciate your approach, presenting yourself in an interview, well, then they will want you in their team, and they will want to keep in touch with you, and they will, like you said, even often say, by the way, if ever you come back, we have a spot here for you. And that's amazing. That's an amazing thing to have.
Or they would recommend you to other people in an area you are moving, because that's what also happened to me. Yeah, he was open to share his portfolio with me while I was in Spain, so that was another amazing.
Well, then let's go into that. So, because again, networking is something, and I don't know if what's your experience, or what's your experience talking about networking with other people, but it makes a lot of people afraid, or even some people I've heard, it's not even afraid. It's some people even feel that it's kind of a dirty type activity because they come from places where networking is more equivalent to, playing with influences to get what you want, and it's not at all about that. So tell me how the fact of having this contact who then says, by the way, I know people in the industry, and I'd be pleased to, or I'd be glad to present you or to put you in contact. How did that happen, and does that lead to where you are today?
Not necessarily, but again, it came as a mental safety place for me, because he said, you have a place to come back, but since our clients are in Spain and you're moving to Spain, if everything happens, these are the contacts you can contact. They already knew me as an interpreter, so, but I cannot use the contact of a company where I was working, but now he gave me the permission just in case, right? So yeah, it's, again, that amazing support I got. And yeah, just it releases the mental pressure of how is it going to be. And I think, yeah, that's when people really appreciate, and you see that exchange. And I was honest with them. I was there. He saw how involved I was I really liked what I was doing, translating and being an interpreter, how I engage with his clients and everything. So I think it's just, if you stay true to yourself, you're authentic, and this is who I am, people will respond to you in that same manner. And talking about network, I would say that, you see, it was easy for me in the industry to say so, because this was a small company. I was daily in contact with my manager. I knew him as a person. I knew his reaction when, there's a bad day. I knew how he reacted, and it didn't felt like, oh my God, I want to hide under the table or things like that. But then in the academia, I don't know why, it was more difficult for me to network, because basically I felt like there's a gap or a distance, to say so, between who I was. I was seeing myself, oh my God, I'm now doing a PhD, all these people, when I would go to a conference, right? Because that was one of the criteria I had to meet for my PhD, to go to at least 3 conferences per year. And when you go into a room and you see that the people that you are citing that are part of your bibliography are there in the room listening to what you have to say. And I mean, the first or second year of my PhD is like, oh my God, I felt like, as everyone is supposed, imposter syndrome. And, what are they going to see? How are they going to query my research or things like that? So I think that in that sense, I felt more the imposter syndrome in the academia than in the private sector, to say so, where I felt like I was the bridge. I was making the communication possible between them, right? I felt like we're all the same level. While in the university, being, around people that are part of your bibliography, for me, it was like, oh my God, I come to say something. And
Yeah, there's a very, very strong hierarchy, and thinking of my experience, I think part of that imposter syndrome can be attributed to the fact that you, as I, were the first in your family to do it. This means that you had no one in your close circle who could tell you, by the way, when you go to a conference, you'll see these people, but look, they're just people, and
exactly,
they're searching, and
exactly.
they're doing their research just like you are. They're at a different stage. You don't need to be afraid of them. Actually, you need to talk. If you cite them, tell them, and tell them how you admire their work, etc., etc., and tell them what you're interested in, but see them as a normal person. No one ever told me that when I was there. So I had the same feeling as you. Part of it is also attributable, I think, to that, which is there's a hidden map to academia that you really need good mentorship to be able to navigate. One thing we need to talk about, and we haven't gotten there because we got deep into the weeds of the academia transition, etc. The next thing is this question of, PhDs are all project managers, so any project management job should be fairly straightforward for a PhD to access. It's something I've heard a lot. Tell us what your journey was into that. So you were in that year teaching, you had that gut feeling of, okay, this is actually not what I was expecting. I'm not feeling that I'm in my tribe here. What were the steps that you took to find where you were going? And then what took you towards the route of project management and then program management?
Yeah, and that's a great question when you think of shifting and getting outside of the university, right? What type of role? So what I first did was identify what type of industry I wanted. And that also helped me, again, looking into my own my own trajectory. So my PhD was very legal, to say so. I was involved in going to trials, to court, and witness trials of gender violence topic, and it was super tough. And I said, I no longer want this. I mean, it was very rewarding what I did and how it helped from a social point of view, but I thought that I don't want to see this in my life every day. So for me, that legal part was super useful also for me to understand the legal system or things like that. But I said, no more legal. I don't want into legal and economic issues every day. So what's something that I would like to work to, what kind of domain I would like to choose? And I said, look, people are getting sick every day. There are lots of diseases. Let's try to find something that brings some light there. And I said, life sciences would be for me. There are lots of companies that are doing research. There's a lot of documentation that needs to be translated into all the countries where the treatments are being made available, or the drugs brought to the market. So I said, this is the type of domain where I want to go. So I first identified the industry where I wanted. And then I said, okay, I'm moving from the academia. I had some experience as a translator and interpreter, but definitely it wasn't in the life sciences. It was more legal, to say so, or commercial for the first company. But then I said, okay, what type of role? And it's true that for me, project manager was the first and most natural I could think of, just because it's true that the PhD is a project in itself, right? You have to, in my case, with a scholarship, I had to manage very well my time because I had a 4-year scholarship, but I had to renew it on a yearly basis. And I had to submit. So you present a project, this is the proposal, and this is what I'm going to do each year. And based on what you say you do and whether you meet that objective or not, you are getting the renewal, right? So you have to pay attention to your time management, to your finances, because if you don't do what you said you do, or you don't accomplish major part of what you said, you're not getting the renewal. So again, I think it's a very interesting aspect, especially for the people who have scholarships, right? And it's true that I had to pay attention to that. And time management again was really important, because it's not that I was staying at home and doing my research. I was going to the university and I was 8 or 9, 10 hours a day being there doing administrative or teaching or whatever it was. And after that 8, 10 hours plus commuting in a big city, I had to do my PhD. So definitely I had to find ways of managing my time in such a way that I would not hit burnout. I did at a certain moment. But that's again a very good experience to know how to manage, and hey, when you need to stop and realign things, to say so. So I think that PhD is definitely a project. It helps you communicate with other people, because you're not just, especially in my case, right? I had to engage with a lot of people. I had to engage with lawyers. I had to engage with gender violence victims, with police officers, administratives from the trials, or, from town offices that help support to the victims. colleagues from the university, colleagues from other universities that were doing PhD, and hey, I have this methodological issue. What can I do? Right. So in the end, you have to engage with what we call in the industry a lot of stakeholders. And that's something that's really useful for the industry. And the second part that I would highlight is communication. Right. So we are prepared as PhD to engage and to communicate at different levels. If you need to talk to a kid of 5 years, you can do it. But if you need to talk to, academics, judges, or whatever, you can do that. You can adjust the level of your communication based on the audience. And I think that's something that showed me that that's a value that we bring into the industry. Because you have different clients, you have clients with different roles. You address a specific communication style when you talk to a general manager, to a CEO, then you talk to a regular client or to your team, or in the end, definitely the respect is there, but the way you articulate the same ideas, it's different, or the timing, or how often you repeat things, or when do you ask a question, or when you just listen more. So I think that communication style is something that we bring. And the second the next thing would be the curiosity, right? You always have to curiosity and fast learning. You have to do your PhD. You have a PhD supervisor, but in the end it's you on your own, so you have to figure things out by yourself. And that's something that is really I've noticed it's appreciated in the industry, being independent and finding your own way to, I have a project, I have a risk here now. You just don't go to your manager and say, hey, this is the project with the risk, take it. No, you have to, find ways of coping with risk. And this is something really important in the industry, mitigating risk, because nothing goes as we plan. So mitigation is on a daily, is something you encounter on a daily basis. And that's something PhD students know how to cope with.
So I have a question. So there's a lot of great things that I'll try to bring them up in the recap that I'm going to do in the end. But what type of questions or what type of information were they trying to get from you when they were interviewing you for your first position coming out of academia? Can you talk a little bit about that before we go into where you are today?
Yeah. So definitely. I think that what I like of some interviews, it also depends on the hiring manager and what type of questions they ask you. But I think that these open questions, why would we hire you? Why do you think you're suitable for this role? I think that's where you have the opportunity to, transfer and talk into their language, right? Because we have the skills already. It's just that maybe we need to understand how to communicate this into the industry. Just like we mentioned, stakeholders. You will never use this word in the academia. And that's where the power of network comes. Get in touch with people that already have a role that you want to get, right? Something that you aspire. Talk to them, see what type of words do they use, what's the main processes, what are the main processes, or things like that. It's very important that you get in contact with people that are already where you want to be. And from there, try to identify how you can, advertise yourself as being suitable. So as I mentioned, describe your PhD as a project, as a complex one, where you meet timelines, budgets, you get into communication, into contact with other people, you mitigate risks very often. You have to learn by yourself. You have to bring solutions by yourself, right? Or bring solutions to the table to decide together with your supervisor. So all these things are really, you prepare classes for your students if you teach. And that's something really valuable if you get to be a project manager or, a team lead, for example, because you are able to prepare trainings for your team. And that's something that in the industry, some people are not so open to prepare trainings and, train their team, like teaching them. And that's something that you already bring and maybe you even enjoy. And that's one of the parts that I enjoy in the industry, the fact that I haven't lost that side. It's just that I do it in a different form. I prepare trainings for my team and I train them. So it's not something that I miss from. That's one of the parts that I really liked at university to teach, but I also have it in the industry. And that's something you can bring to the table. And even if the role of project manager doesn't mean that you're going to train, you just leave it there because you know what, maybe you're not going to be hired for the project manager, but you can even be offered the opportunity to be the team lead, right? Because you just bring them to the table things that maybe they didn't think of, right? So it's very important to talk to someone that already has the position that you want and see how, this is what they want, this is how they talk, this is what I have, how can I bridge the terminology and expressing my skill set.
So I guess for someone who's listening and might be interested, I guess sending them to you to talk with you is not a bad idea.
Definitely, I'm open to support anyone.
So some key words here have stuck with me, like mitigating risk, like dealing with stakeholders, planning, dealing with budget, dealing with timelines, and these are all things that I've heard myself once I got into my first industry job. I was not a project manager, but I was hearing these things, and of course, you just said it, and it's funny because we're both translators, but one of the things you need to do when leaving a professional ecosystem to another one is to learn the language. And there's no better way than talking to Anca or someone else who's doing the job you want to do, and learning how do I translate what I did in the lab to what interests the hiring person in front of me. And often you could even miss an opportunity just because you didn't use the right term, while in fact you have experience that's translatable. So again, very important to have informational interviews and to go across that wall of fear of talking with someone you don't know. It's really easy now on LinkedIn, for example, and start learning about this space and start with genuine curiosity and again, be authentic with people, saying, hey, I'm in the fourth year of my PhD, and I'm thinking about my possibilities maybe outside academia. I see that this was your journey, and I'd really love to know how you did it. And that's it. That's enough as a first question to ask, or first ask you have of someone that you meet on LinkedIn. And if they have time, they'll say, okay, sure. If they don't, they might say it, and then you don't need to take it personally. But now, today you are a program manager, and there's a difference between project and program manager. It feels to me like, and we've talked also about it a little bit before the interview, while you were a project manager with, I don't know if it was different employers or clients, you didn't need to get any specific training. Today, as program manager, you don't need it to, but you are. So let's maybe talk about what's the difference between being a program manager and a project manager, and what are you doing today to develop your career even more?
So the difference between project manager and program manager, just as I see it, so when you're a project manager, you really handle the project. So you got the approval from a client to go ahead with that project, and you start to plan it, to execute, to monitor, deliver. So you do the task. In our case, maybe you just coordinate with other translators because you don't speak all the languages in the world, but then you handle the process of translation. So you're the project manager, the point of contact between client and the translators responsible for that project. As a project manager, you sometimes handle multiple projects at the same time, right? And even you, depending on how the structure of the company is, you can handle multiple clients or work on multiple accounts, right? So there's this interesting part where you need to be flexible in, different client has different requirements, or, if a client wants a deliverable in such a way, the other one wants it different, right? So you have to pay attention to that. I mean, focus on understanding the client's needs. As a program manager, I'm no longer involved in handling the projects, right? So just as the current company where I work in, the program manager is part of the project management office. So if project management is handling the project, as a program manager is, I would say, something where you handle the processes, right? So you handle projects, and in program management, you handle processes. You make sure that the team has at their disposal the necessary documentation, which has to be aligned with the quality management system, because most of the companies have to go on audit to be certified. So you have to be sure that you create the necessary documentation for them, and that's what a program manager does. So you create the documentation, and that's a plus for a PhD because you already know how to write, how to structure, adapt the level of difficulty in language and things like that. So that's also really important. If you want to go directly into the program manager and skip the project manager part, that's a plus, I would say, for PhD. They know how to structure documentation and adapt level of language. So as a program manager, we are more involved in not so much in the production per se, I would say, but rather in having a bigger perspective, a more global perspective, and maybe taking part in the decision making of how can we improve, how we can optimize our resources, our efforts, how we can improve the revenue, the benefits in the revenue. So you just have a bigger perspective of what's going on. And you can say, hey, but if we do this project in, 3 months, is there a chance that we can do it in 2 months and a half? So you work closely with your team who does the projects, right, with the project managers, but you try to optimize, make things easier for them. And then again, you adjust the documentation to make sure that they have the necessary documentation, that they are trained, they have access to the necessary training. If new people join the team, you train the new ones, or from time to time, you even have to prepare refresher trainings because sometimes, you are involved in different projects. In our case, for example, when we talk about linguistic validation, we do linguistic validation with clinicians review or with cognitive debriefing. We also do migration of scales from paper to electronic device, things like that. So if for 3 months you are involved only in linguistic validation with clinician review, and all of a sudden you get a project of migration, I need to switch. Where do I go? So people are independent because the program manager prepares in advance the documentation, the trainings, and are able there to provide them refresher trainings if needed. So I would say that project manager is most based on production, and program management is more on processes and helping, improving, optimizing, I would say, and works very closely with the directors of the department in terms of strategies and things like that.
It feels like even more than project management, you must be using skills from your PhD in this position, in this role, right?
Yeah. So here I would really highlight communication and training. And that's really, regardless whether you are, whether you do a PhD in life sciences or humanities, training, I think it's important. For example, imagine that you have a team and they handled a project in a way that was not totally successful and the client complains, right? So you get an escalation. The program manager is most of the times the point of contact for escalations. So you have to look into what happened there. What was it that it didn't work? Is it the team that they don't have clarity on how to execute this project? Is it on the, your translators? Maybe they don't have the necessary instructions. You have to look into the instructions, the written instructions you provide. Or is it that, I don't know, the processes are not streamlined enough? So working closely with the team and training them, make sure that the team is really trained. And here is where we come into writing the training is either providing the documentation or really going into workshops with them. And that's what we really bring from the university.
One of the things I remember, because when I was, and I'm just reminding people that I was interviewed by Anca yesterday. And so there's an episode on her podcast, Language Surfers. And in there, I talked about my almost 5 years in a company that was doing medical writing, where I was doing medical writing. And a few people, once you get in a company, you can often switch tracks within the company. And one of the things I saw people doing was actually becoming editors, starting writers, becoming editors, and some of them actually becoming project managers. And a lot of them, or a few of them, mentioned this. Not even mentioned. They went and took this training, this PMP training. At a certain point, I even considered it, and it felt to me like it was a passport to a career in project management. And you haven't mentioned it yet. And I say this knowing that you have something to say about it, but it wasn't something that you needed to do coming into the career, right?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, at that moment when I was pivoting from academia to university, PMP was not that a trending topic, to say so. So maybe I was lucky in that sense. So I pivoted without needing a PMP. But once I was in the industry, I realized that, hey, there's something that I really am missing from this part. And I started to look into what are the necessary or the most important certifications, because you want to go to have one instead of having 3, 4, 5. So PMP was on the list, definitely. And I started to think of it, and basically now I'm preparing for the PMP, but it's not something that uh, a requirement to say so. You also need to look very closely to the job description when you apply for a job. There are jobs currently that really put there the PMP, desirable, or either they put it as desirable, either they put it as necessary to have a PMP or similar. So it's very important that if the employer is really looking for someone who has the certification and the knowledge behind the certification, they normally currently they put it in the job description.
Okay. So what this means, and it's what you did, is if it's not there, or even if it says desirable, you can still apply, and then make your point about like you were saying, like you did. If you feel that not if you feel, if your PhD required you to budget, required you to do these things, required you to deal with different stakeholders, you can vouch for yourself and advocate for yourself, and you can get the position based on your years of graduate school experience, if you have real and good stories, let's say, to tell about that. And I think that's the take-home message for that part. And of course, now Anca has developed her career. She wants to get to another level, and she now is working towards her PMP, and it's fine.
Yeah, I'll let you know once I get it. But I think that it's very important, even if you are in a position that you already wanted. It's not having one additional certification; it's the knowledge
It's
that
the
you gain
knowledge,
with
that's
it.
it.
And exactly, yeah. So even if you want to pivot and you don't have the the PMP certification, that's where it's very important that you talk with people from the industry so that you get used to the specific terminology.
Do it often. If you even if you think you don't have time, if you like once a month, say once a month, I go on LinkedIn, I find a profile of someone who's interesting, who has an interesting trajectory, and I send them a short message saying I'd be curious to talk to them. And once a month, it's really not a lot, but it's enough for you to start learning and start getting a feel of what that job, that industry, that space look like. And there's nothing better than that to smoothen your transition after.
Exactly. And people are open to help.
That's why they're on platforms like LinkedIn, is because they're open to connect. Now, Anca, if before I give a little kind of a little summary of the take homes for me, if people want to reach out to you, so here I'm for people who are watching. There's the podcast on the different podcast platforms. It's Language Surfers. There's a website for the podcast called languagesurfers.com. But if they want to reach out to you, is LinkedIn the best way to go?
Yes, definitely. LinkedIn, my name and surname, Anca Bodzer. Feel free to, write me a message, and I'll be more than happy to support anyone from the audience.
Perfect. Then what I'll do is I'll share these links and also your LinkedIn profile link in the show notes of the episode. Now, Anca, one of the things that I keep from our conversation, and that I think it's really important, and it's something I have mentioned before, you just said it naturally while telling your story, is, if at all possible, try to first listen, but also respect what your body, what your inner voice is telling you when you are, interviewing either for a PhD position, but also for a job position. If there are red flags that come up, if you have this kind of pit in your stomach, this probably means something. It means that the people in front of you are really not your tribe, your type of people. It can mean that the culture of the lab or the culture of the company does not fit with you. And all it means is, this is not a good fit. I'm not going to put myself through the process of getting into this relationship, because these are relationships, and then trying to make it work if things are already not optimal, and just keep on looking. but respect whatever your body and your intuition is telling you about these different things. Anca went all the way to being a lecturer, and then she knew in her bones that this was not the right thing, and that she was lucky enough to have some networking and some experience in the private, which allowed her to right away see the path that she should follow. But the value there also for me is there is value in trying. So, of course, if you could have the career you have today without, let's say, losing, and I'm using this in a very loose way, a year doing lecturing that was really not the thing, maybe it would, you'd be more advanced. But then again, I think you needed to go through that experience to know that. But there's different ways to know that too. We talked a lot during our conversation about informational interviews, talking with people that are in places that you're curious about, and that's not only a way to find the places you'd like to be in, but it's also a great way to understand, oh, okay, this thing that looked so good on paper, after talking 20 minutes with this person, now I know it's not for me. The other big thing that I'm taking home is this point of being authentic when interviewing, when presenting yourself as a candidate for something. Not only is it going to let people have a real assessment of who you are, what your motivations are, but also it'll build respect in people who are talking with you, because people appreciate authenticity. They know when you are just saying what you want them to hear. And it's not always that's going to bring you what you expect or what you want. In her case, it was clear that they preferred someone who was authentic and saying, actually, in a year, I'm going to go away for masters. But they knew they had a real person there, and they didn't have someone who is just a pleaser. And I think that has a lot of value. So authenticity is another one. And when we go up to the PhD, we're used to studying and to have, I'm going to getting this degree and then this degree and that degree. Before embarking on another degree or certificate, think about, do you really need it? You've spent already a lot of time in class. You have a lot of tools. You have a lot of worth to put on the table before launching yourself into, I'm going to get this other degree that's going to open this door, etc. Try first to have to build this network, to talk with humans, and to have conversations with people who may become mentors, who may become employers, but also who can just be part of your network, and try to see, do I really need, after all these years of studying, another degree? And then eventually it might come a point like Anca, and then like it happened with me with translation in your career, where you say, you know what, actually I want to go back to be able to do this job with more knowledge of the industry and of the domain. But often when you come out of a PhD, you do not need to go and spend more money and time doing that. So just be cognizant of that, and also try to look for employers who are either not asking for other certification, or that say it's good to have, but it's not a necessity. Of course, there's much more in all of the stories that you shared, but these three elements I think are very important, are very inspiring, and I'm super grateful that you were able to come on the Papa PhD microphone to share your experience and to kind of pull the curtain on what this project management and program management thing is. So thank you, Anca.
Thank you so much, David, for having me. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope that your audience finds it interesting.
I'm sure they will. A lot of people look to project management as kind of the first stepping stone after, but for a lot of them, it's kind of a black box. And I think after listening to your story, I think they have a blueprint of what to do and how to go about it. So I'm super, super grateful. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of this brand new season 6 of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, with me, David Mendes, and my guest, Anca Bodzer. If you have questions or comments about what we talked about in this episode, you can now bring them directly to me in the brand new Skool Papa PhD community. Simply go to skool.com/PapaPhD in one word and find like-minded people sharing their stories and asking their questions about how to navigate your career after the PhD. Looking forward to seeing you there at our next Q&A.